This is a video guide to Uruluuk, and I apologize for the most likely bad pronunciation of that name. This is the final boss in Gilded Prophecy. Keep in mind the instructions in this video will most likely change, as this encounter will probably get some changes added to it as it gets fine-tuned and some aspects of the fight potentially get fixed as they do not appear to be functioning properly, which at that time I'll update the video with new information. This fight has a Titan Rage timer, which is roughly around 10 minutes. If at any point you get to a third focus stage, which we'll explain later, you will immediately wipe afterwards. I would initially like to thank both Floppy and Mr. Takedown on the Rift forums for helping out with snippets of information and advice for this encounter. This fight encompasses many different aspects your raid needs to be highly aware of, whether it is DPS requirements and crystals, awareness on moving in and out immediately, intense area healing requirements, as well as proper positioning during transition phases to prevent a wipe. We'll discuss his initial ground phase abilities first. Uruluuk has 5 main abilities you need to be aware of. The first is called Explosive Crystal. This is a targeted attack that creates AoE damage to surrounding players. Because of this, it helps to have your raid slightly spread out to minimize the damage that is done. His other important AoE ability is he'll start casting Crumbling Boulder. This is a big, full raid AoE damage that occurs. This needs to be healed up immediately. You may have a few attempts that he'll throw an explosive crystal immediately after the boulder and thus killing a player almost instantly. If this is happening quite frequently, it is recommended that you use endurance vials and other abilities to keep your maximum survivability. The next ability is that he'll crystallize a player. Similar to Majolic and AP, this needs to be broken out immediately. He makes an emote that he points at a player. If this player is in melee range, they need to run out and get distance, preferably towards the center of the map. Reason being is if the player is crystalled too close to him, they heal him for roughly 3 to 5% of his HP depending on the DPS of your raid. Usually after the time when the crystal is over and broken, he'll summon a Storm of Power. The raid needs to immediately run to him and stand close. If you are outside his ability aura, you will immediately be killed. Depending on where you are after the crystal, you can mount up and make the timer on this. His last main ability is called Fist of Lapis. This is a targeted attack that in the first phase will only target the tank. This will kill them if they don't do anything about it. There are 2 things you can do for this. The first is to interrupt. However, currently you can actually reflect it. Doing so will reflect the attack back to Uruluuk for roughly 30,000 damage. Time-wise, he'll cast Fist 4 times and then pour it up into the air. During this time, the entire raid needs to run to the crystal near the center. He'll emote he is throwing a massive boulder at a player. At this time, a green crystal will fall on that player, and the rest of the raid needs to be in the bubble that it spawns. There are also 2 adds that spawn within this. The tank needs to immediately pick this up as they attack the crystal. During this time, Uruluuk will rain boulders down on the party that damages the entire raid, and the crystal as well. However, as long as you are protected, you will take very minimal damage. Now then, if the tank was slow to pick up the adds, and the adds were able to get enough damage on the crystals, the boulder will destroy the crystal, creating a raid that is unprotected, and you would be taking a lot of damage. At the end of this cast, he'll port down near the crystal and for 20 seconds take significantly more damage. You want to DPS him until there is about 3 seconds left on the buff that he has. At that time, you need to run to the west side of the room and wait for 3 crystal beacons to spawn. These beacons have roughly 65,000 hit points. The reason you want to start on the left is this beacon gives him stacks of gold, which is unpurgeable and causes him to do more damage and take less damage at 1% intervals. You want to stay at best around 4 stacks of gold for each beacon phase, ideally shooting for 3. The other 2 beacons give him stacking buffs that increases damage by 5% and decreases damage taken by 5%. However, these buffs can and should be purged. While attacking the crystal beacon, you yourself will receive a stacking buff that increases your damage up to 50% for 40 seconds, which can be refreshed. However, with any of our attempts, it did not appear as if this buff was actually increasing our damage at all, so most likely it is a potential bug that will be fixed. We found it best to destroy the west beacon, then the south beacon, and then keep melee on the boss, as we only had a range attack and destroy the right beacon to maximize DPS time on the boss himself. At 30%, Uruluuk ports back to his starting area, and the final phase starts with him receiving a 15% damage buff. Timing of this transition is very important. A few things to watch out for is you do not want any crystallized players left around, nor do you want to push him over when he is on the southern spawn point near the bridge. Doing so will cause deaths or a wipe. You want to push him over when he is either on the left or the right side. Once he ports, 3 things occur immediately. First, just south of the center crystal, 3 fallen adventurers will spawn. These are skeletons that have 35,000 hit points and need to be picked up immediately by your tank, as they do significant damage to the rest of the raid. Uruluuk is no longer tanked in this phase, so your tank should pick them up and place them just south of the boss near the crystal where they spawned. If the adds get close to the boss, they heal him very quickly. The next thing that occurs is his Fist of Lethus ability is casted randomly on a player now and not just the tank. Immediately after the first fist, he'll summon his storm, so your raid needs to be close and collapse to him immediately. This is near impossible to make if you push him over on the southern end. Occasionally, an ad will get a buff on them that makes them larger in size. This can be purged. We found it best to use our Shamakar on the ads for both AoE damage as well as being able to purge the buff that they receive. An additional ad spawns every 3% of his health and needs to be picked up immediately. When he summons his storm, depending on your tank, you can do one of 2 things. If your tank is a warrior, they unfortunately have to run in with any ads that are up and potentially healing the boss a bit. At this time, we had our DPS switch to cleave abilities to get both damage on the boss and the ads as quick as possible. However, if your tank is a rogue, they can stay out entirely and cycle their cooldowns to minimize any damage the storm does to them so they do not have to run in. This is basically the rest of the fight, up until he dies. This is a very healing intensive phase as the AoE damage is significant and needs to be topped off very quickly. Don't be shy to use potions that heal the raid or any other abilities that you have to stay alive. As far as drops, he does drop a tier 3 shoulder token each time, as well as one other epic item. Thank you for watching this video. I hope it helps you in your guild down this difficult boss. As I said in the beginning, most likely some mechanics of this fight will change in the upcoming weeks. At that time, I will make another video and update it with proper information. Thank you again.